Okay, the Comics Kid 2099 here, and I want to talk to you about a comic book series called The Order. Usually what I would do is I would talk about a series like this one volume at a time, but this is a really unusual example in that this entire series only ran about 10 issues. I think it only ran 10 issues, and both trades here collect all 10 issues, and it's really just one continuous story that stops in the middle so that it can be two trades. This is one of those series that I think they very easily could have done one ultimate collection of the entire series, kind of like they did with Next Wave. They could have very easily done that here, and it would have felt like one story. It wouldn't have felt like two stories collected in one book. And so I've got both volumes here, but I'm going to be talking about the whole Order series. And the first volume is called The Next Right Thing, collects the first 5 issues of the series. And then the next volume is called California Dreaming, collects the 6 through 10 of this series. And this whole series was created by Matt Fraction and Barry Kitson, was written by Matt Fraction, drawn by Barry Kitson for the first 8 issues, and then issues 9 and 10, Barry Kitson did the rough designs or rough layouts, and let me look up the guy who did the pencils on those last 2 issues. Javier Salteris. I'm not familiar with that guy. Barry Kitson is an artist I really like. He drew a lot of the Legion 89 series, which that was a spin-off of the Invasion event from DC Comics in like 88 or so, and every year it would change its name. Legion 89, Legion 90, 91, etc. And that was kind of a prequel spin-off thing for the Legion of Superheroes set in the present day. And he's also done some penciling on Legion of Superheroes, Mark Waid's Legion of Superheroes from the 2000s. And I really like his art. That may surprise you because I find a lot of time his faces kind of remind me of Jim Lee's faces that he draws. But for some reason, I'm not a huge fan of Jim Lee, but I really like Barry Kitson's work. It surprises me. It may surprise you. Maybe you really don't care what I think of his work. But this series is basically a 10-issue spin-off of Iron Man. In a way, it's an Iron Man side story that doesn't really have a whole lot of Iron Man in it. And it's actually technically a spin-off of Civil War, which more and more I'm finding that Civil War, while it may have been a really poorly written story, it worked remarkably well to jumpstart a whole lot of spin-off ideas, because there have been a lot of different series that I haven't even read, that I'm only just now getting around to reading within the last few years. A lot of stories that jumped out of Civil War, while Civil War was written really badly and just nobody came away from that really enjoying how their favorite characters were handled, the event itself kind of offered a lot of new opportunities for new stories to be told. And one of those things, actually the big thing, is that after the Civil War was won, one of the ideas was that there was going to be a 50-state initiative where every state in the United States was going to have a superhero team of its very own to fight and protect the people of that state. Because for the past, 40 years before Civil War, basically every superhero lived in New York City, with a few exceptions, but basically they all were just right there next door to each other. And so this idea was, we're going to kind of spread these characters out a little bit, and there could potentially be other stories that you can tell by putting these characters in other states. And I would say another good example of this, a really interesting, good spin-off of Civil War, was the Hellcat miniseries, which was done by Stuart Immonen's wife, I think, was the writer of it. And I think Immonen, I don't remember how his last name is spelled. It's the guy who, he's done stuff like Next Wave and Superman Secret Identity, that guy. His wife, I believe, wrote the Hellcat miniseries, and Immonen himself drew it. But I'm not here to talk about that miniseries. I'm here to talk about The Order. This is another one where we're saying, okay, every state is going to have their own superhero team. California's team is The Order. And this was originally going to be called The Champions, but then Marvel found out that they waited way too long to try and renew their rights to the name of The Champions, which was a superhero team in the 1970s, and so they couldn't use the name The Champions. And if you buy these trades and you're looking at some of the rough sketches in the back of the book, on one of the sketches it will say something about The Champions. It's because originally this was going to be called The Champions, but they couldn't do that. And like I said, it is technically a spin-off of Civil War because it's jumping right off the events of the end of Civil War, but it's much more an Iron Man story that Iron Man isn't in. Iron Man is in this series. He's kind of like the Q branch or M of the James Bond movies for the Order. He's here, he's talking to them every once in a while, but they're the ones who are in the thick of the action. They're the ones doing stuff, and they're the ones that the story is focused on. But Tony Stark, he's there every once in a while, but by the time you get to the end of the series, you're really finding out, oh, this is basically just an Iron Man story that Tony Stark forgot to show up in, or something like that. And I'm going to go ahead and spoil who the main bad guy of the series is. It's Ezekiel Stane, who is the son of Obadiah Stane, who is a bad guy created in the 1980s. If you are familiar with the Marvel movies, he was the bad guy in the first Iron Man movie. And Ezekiel Stane, I don't know a whole lot about him. I think he was a character from what's his name? Matt Fraction's Iron Man run, which again makes me feel like this is basically just an extension of the Iron Man series. If you've been reading Matt Fraction's Iron Man run, or if you've already read Matt Fraction's Iron Man run, then you might really want to read The Order, because this kind of explores and expands on some of the stuff that Matt Fraction was, I'm assuming, doing in the Iron Man stuff that he wrote. I haven't read any of Matt Fraction's Iron Man work. I kind of want to, partly because I'm very slowly experimenting with and dipping my toes in Iron Man, seeing if it's a series that I want to read more of, but also I'm kind of a fan of Matt Fraction. He's done some stuff that's been really good, and he's done some stuff that I haven't really cared for, but this is one of the things that I think is really good, and it makes me furious that it got canceled after 10 issues. This is a series that I'm assuming people didn't care because it didn't have Spider-Man or the X-Men or the Avengers in it. It had a whole bunch of new characters, and so people didn't really want to read it. I don't know why people were interested in Avengers The Initiative, which is another spin-off of Civil War, and that had a whole bunch of new characters in it, and people were interested in that, but they weren't interested in The Order. Maybe because Avengers The Initiative had the name Avengers in it, I don't know. But I'm just assuming that really bad sales, really low sales, kind of forced this series to end prematurely. For the most part, all of the plots kind of sort of wrap up. Ezekiel Stane gets away at the end. The good guys don't catch the bad guy, and I'm assuming that he does eventually come back in Matt Fraction's Iron Man run, which, in theory, I should be upset that I was basically tricked into reading this Iron Man story that isn't actually an Iron Man story, but I'm not, because this is a pretty good series. Now, like I said, it doesn't wrap everything up. If you are wanting a conclusion to everything, you're going to be disappointed, because the main bad guy gets away, and especially there in the last few pages, it's like, okay, so, the Order, do we want this team to keep going? And the leader of the group says, yes, we do, we got to catch the bad guy. And then it's like, the end. And I'm like, but that's not a the end scene. That's a to be continued scene. And I have no idea if the Order ever showed up anywhere else. If they showed up in Fraction's Iron Man run, I don't know. I'd love to know if they showed up somewhere else, but as far as I know, this is their story. These two trades right here. So if you want their story, you can read these, and then maybe you know more than I do about where they showed up after this. But this is a really good new superhero series, and I almost wish that this is something that Matt Fraction had just taken to a creator-owned company, like Image or Dark Horse or something. I really wish that he had done this as his own creator-owned series, and then he wouldn't have had to have canceled it after 10 issues because nobody would be reading it. Because I have a feeling a lot more people would be interested in Matt Fraction's creator-owned indie superhero team than people would be interested in a spin-off of Civil War and Iron Man that has a whole bunch of characters they don't know or care about. That's just the way the world works, I guess. But if this had been an indie book, I have a feeling it would have lasted a lot longer, and then we could have seen some of these characters and some of these ideas and concepts kind of be fleshed out a little more. Unfortunately, we only got 10 issues, and what I really like about this is that we have 5 or 6 characters who are introduced here, and they are not short-shafted. None of them are kind of put on the side and not explored enough. All of these characters are given a little bit of exploration. Not a lot of exploration, because the way it's handled is that it's a 10-issue series. Each issue kind of focuses on one of the characters. So for 8 issues, you may not care at all about Vita at all. But then for 1 or 2 issues, you kind of get to know the character behind the costume, and you find out, oh, so that's what makes that character tick. I like her a lot more now. And that happened with a whole bunch of these characters where when you first start off, I'm like, I I don't care about any of these guys. It's not really giving me a reason to. And then I slowly start to care about each and every one of them. Not all of them. There's a few characters here who I'm like, yeah, if you took them out of this equation, I probably wouldn't care at all. The shapeshifter girl, didn't really care about her. I would have liked for there to be a little bit more done with Vita, and the guy who was inside the robot suit, I would have liked for there to have been a little bit more done with him. It feels like the plot with Mulholland Black was kind of condensed to be a little bit shorter than what Fraction originally intended. That feels like it's supposed to be a lot bigger than what it actually is when you start getting into that story, and I really feel like they should have spent a little bit more time on that story. But then again, her connection with the bad guys in Volume 2, that's kind of all of Volume 2, so I guess you could say that they gave it a lot more than they gave some of these other characters, like Vita, or the shapeshifter girl, whose name I can't even remember. This series is really good. I can't really think of anything bad about it. I was a little taken aback that in the last 2 issues, Barry Kitson's art is not what's being used. It's the Javier Saltares guy, and his art is not bad. But I think I would have been happier if all 2 volumes had been all Saltares or all Kitson. I wish it had been all of one or all of the other. Don't stop 8 issues in and then do this other guy and have him do the artwork for 2 issues. That just kind of throws me for a loop. But neither one of them does bad artwork. I really love Kitson's work, and I think Saltares does pretty good work as well. I can't think of anything else to say here. I really like this series. I'm disappointed that it didn't last longer, and I'm disappointed that to this day, I mean, this series started in like 2007 or so. I'm disappointed that here we are now 8 years later, and we haven't had a whole lot of continuation of any of these characters that I know of. For all I know, Fraction used all of these characters in his Iron Man run. That's something that I may or may not discover if and when I get into Fraction's Iron Man. But for now, I haven't seen anything with these guys outside of this series, and that disappoints me, but only because I really loved what I read here. So I would wholeheartedly recommend that you guys read The Order, Volumes 1 and 2, The Next Right Thing, and California Dreaming. And even if you haven't read Civil War or Matt Fraction's Iron Man run, I would still recommend you read these, because it's been many years since I read Civil War, and I haven't read Matt Fraction's Iron Man run, and I think that these stories, they stand very well on their own without you having to read those stories. So I would definitely recommend that you read The Order. So do that, go read those, and then come back and let me know what you thought of those stories, and let me know what you thought of this video. If you liked it, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back later in the week with a couple different other videos. So I will see you guys then. Have a great rest of the day. Catch you then.